And hello everybody, welcome to the first episode of the Ultra Sharp podcast. Now we're going to be doing things a little bit differently here. Instead of reading through the script, I actually will be trying to be speaking through the top of my head. But in this episode, we're going to be talking about a good amount of things. We're going to be talking about Ultraman Blazar episode 10. We're going to be talking about Godzilla. And we're also going to be doing our daily Kaiju Mania. So there's a lot of things on the agenda. I'm really excited to get started with y'all. And welcome to the Ultra Sharp podcast. And we come in with episode 10, Father and Son of Ultraman Blazar. I really like this episode. First off, we have the reoccurring kaiju, the Maga, which we've seen many times in Ultraman X, Ultraman Tiga, and I think Ultra Fight Orb too. And maybe even Ultraman Z, but the pretty much gist is we've seen him many times. But I really like how they re-innovated him for this episode as more of a kaiju from the natures, like we've seen in Dorgo and other kaiju. And I like that better than how they've normally done it, where he's just a random subterranean kaiju that's just popped out of the ground. And including that, the baby Damaga is just adorable as well. The baby Damaga is this new suit, other than just like a smaller version of the adult Damaga, which I really like. And if y'all have actually watched Godzilla vs. Destroyer, then you will know what I'm talking about when I say Godzilla Jr., which is pretty much like a smaller, cuter version of Godzilla. And baby Damaga is just adorable, like I said. Its spikes are smaller, its yellow crest is also smaller too, it's just adorable. And Blazar is a great fighter once again. We see him have two new abilities this time, one using the Nijikagashi stone to freeze his opponents, and another one using his spiral rod as a healing rod, which both of them are pretty cool nonetheless. And Earth Garen is an absolute menace this episode, and I love it. This time around, he is controlled by the GGF. Now that Gento is occupied with his family, GGF, the main team that found Scarred, is now in control of Earth Garen, and now he has some pure blue eyes, sort of similar to how we saw in Alien Kanan's episode, where he had pure red eyes when he was controlled by Alien Kanan. So I really like the implications that he's not really controlled by Scarred, and instead in like mega military mode. And related to the military, I like how we finally got the reappearance of the GGF general, and his ruthlessness in taking down the Maga is just incredible. And I actually have some inferences for why we might have had to wait so long to see him now. And if y'all remember at the end of episode 2, we saw him get pretty furious about how, or not furious, but we saw him tell this to the Scar team, which was to defeat the kaiju before Blazar does. But we never actually see this theme become a reoccurring plot later on in any other episode other than that. So what I believe is that the GGF general might be frustrated and even enraged with how Scar has repeatedly failed to accomplish that point. And I'm really excited to see how he reacts in the next episode, where he actually does have a big role. And additionally, we also have Gento and of course his family. That is the main plot point of this show, or this episode. And I have a few gripes about it. The main one is the acting of Gento's son. I believe his name is Jun. Now, while some people say that they really liked his acting, I felt that it was a bit detracting from the mood of the episode. but my bigger complaint is how they used him more as a plot development rather than a character of his own. Now we do see him have and when I mean him, I mean Gento's son, have a bit of a more charm when we get to the end of the episode. But during their walk before Gento gets convinced to fight Damaga, we see him talk to Gento, but it's more like he's just spelling out the themes and the morals of the episode rather than Gento having to figure it out on his own. But the fights were amazing. The Ultraman Blazar's fight against himself as Gento and Blazar fight for control of whether to kill Damaga or spare Damaga was amazing. The choreography was amazing at most. And there's one plot point that I really like, how it spurred debate between even the most observant Ultraman fans, and that is whether Blazar was the one who wanted to kill Damaga or Gento. Because on first assumption, we see Gento being more of the human-like character because of how his son has talked to him about how every father and son is worth his life and all that. But after some observations and some inferences, people have actually started to lean more towards Blazar being the more human person in this scenario. So I really like that sort of debate. But overall, this was a very good episode. The fights were amazing, like I said before. The plot was formidable, and the enemy of Damaga coming back was a very welcome surprise. But overall, I would say that this is closer to a mid-A tier rated episode. I do this personal thing where I make a tier list. I will show an image of that right now, but that's just something I wanted to add just to conclude this little segment of Ultraman Blazar. Welcome to Kaiju Mania. This week's episode features the great Alien Bolton. From the original Ultraman series. Let's talk about him. Standing at an average of 50 meters, this is one of Ultraman's most well-known foes in history, with their feud ranging from the original 66 to as recent as the Ultraman X movie. He wields two large claw-like blasters for arms, which serve both for long-range attacks and also as clubs if needed. Not to mention, he has an amazing illusion ability as well as teleportation to dodge any quick timing attacks. Alien Bolton has had an insane amount of variants over the history of the Ultraman franchise, including Mecha Boltons, animated Boltons, the weird ones from Ultraman Powered, hardcore Boltons, and the list goes on. But who is Alien Bolton in the first place? The Alien Bolton are space invaders from a long-destroyed planet who seek for a new home, that being Earth. However, they couldn't tolerate coexisting with humans, and that hubris would lead them to their own demise by the great Ultraman. However, Boltons have varied their stories over different Ultraman shows, but the consensus is clear: invaders who seek Earth for themselves. Unless you're a tinier Bolton, of course, then I guess you would have to side with the humans. Alien Boltons are certainly one of the coolest enemies of the Ultraman franchise, and I highly recommend you check them out further. Now for our Toku segment. We don't really have an official name for this segment yet, but I was originally going to talk about the Gamma Rebirth films. However, after watching the full 6-episode series, I thought that deserved a longer segment of its own, so we will spare that for a different day. But right now, I actually want to talk about the Godzilla Minus One trailer that we have just seen recently in the past few weeks. So first thoughts, based off of the teaser, which actually came out a longer time ago, I was a bit hesitant to accept Godzilla Minus One, because originally I just had seen it as another movie where Godzilla brawls against Japan and Japan loses to the mighty Godzilla. And it's like a tragedy and disaster. And we've seen many of those already, so I was a little bit hesitant to accept the movie. But after seeing the trailer, I just had to change my mind. It was amazing. Godzilla himself was ferocious, was formidable, but I think his effect on the humans was actually what made me lighten up on what this movie could really be. The destruction of the city, the one frame where we saw the classic buildings of the clock tower get absolutely destroyed, and the sight of actual humans being laid across like dead bodies of war, and that one scene of a civilian being trapped under debris, those were just mortifying to see, and I really love the theme that this movie is going to be in. Because of how this movie takes place in post-Meiji era Japan, Japan has just came out of World War II as a failure and a loss. So having Godzilla come over and destroy more of the city or more of the country is going to be absolutely devastating for the country. And the way I'm interpreting this so far is that Godzilla represents the rage of the US as revenge for the events of Pearl Harbor. So whether that inference is true or not, we'll see. But this movie is coming out in December 1st, nationwide, amidst all theaters. So I'm very excited for that. And I do hope that all of y'all can actually come and see the movie as well. And I would just like to end the episode, our first episode, with my hopes for the newest Blazar episode. So what do we see here? We see this new kaiju. His name is Gibalga. He comes from an asteroid from space, and seems like Earth Garen is having a hard time dealing with him. By what we see, Blazar also comes in to fight it, but it looks very formidable. We see one frame of him opening up, or like at least opening his insides, and by what I've seen, the design looks very cool. This was the final kaiju that we haven't seen yet in the Ultraman Blazar trailer, so I was really seeing what he could do in the episodes, and given that he is so close to the end of the first arc of Ultraman Blazar, I can already tell that he will be a formidable foe, maybe even more formidable than Nichigagashi. But that design that I talked about earlier, when he opened up, it reminded me of a few kaiju that we've seen in the past, like Mezameyo from Ultraman Tiga, Bokura from Ultraman Mebius, and even a little bit of Gankyu and a different eye-like kaiju from Ultraman Gaia. And I have some really good hopes for this episode. As I said earlier, we will be seeing the General again reappear after a long time, so his involvement in this episode will be really grand, as well as the conflict of humanity that Blazar and Gento have amongst each other. So I'd love to see those plot points really come into action here in this episode. If you have been listening all the way to now, then you'll know, of course, that this podcast episode came out after Ultraman Blazar episode 11, so I'm sorry about that. But I hope that you really like this podcast episode, and also might have a bit more of an interest for shows like Ultraman Blazar and movies like Godzilla and Gamera. We will talk more about Gamera next episode, so stay tuned for that. And thank you everyone for coming to our first episode of the Ultra Sharp Podcast.
立ち上